Alright everyone, welcome back to the MVC PHP Framework series. Been a few weeks since I've posted anything. If you've watched my live stream, in the last live stream we did a little bit of the validation refactors, and that went kind of long and we didn't finish, so I wanted to just kind of make some separate videos for this series and not have them in a live format. But if you would like to see my live streams, we did go over most of this in part 2, and in part 3 we will finish it. So by the time you're watching this, it could be part 3 is up and done too, if you don't want to wait for all the videos, because this will probably take several videos. But what we're going to do in this part of the series is we are going to fix a few bugs. I've switched over to Linux Mint and found that I had a bug that I didn't notice on the Mac, because the Mac isn't quite as picky about case sensitivity as Linux. So there is a bug, and we're going to fix that first. You can see the bug on my screen, the class cookie not found, and it's a really simple fix, but we will fix that. This bug happened for me when I went to log out. The other thing that we're going to do is, I don't really like the way form validation is done, and the reason I don't like it is because it's not really done in a way that can be extended easily, and especially for object-oriented programming and for you know, setting up a framework where you can create your own validation things. It's just not set up well, and so I wanted to take an opportunity to refactor that. And I'm pretty excited to show you guys how validation is going to work from here on out. And it's going to make form validation awesome. I mean, it's going to make it really easy for you guys to use and for you to extend it. So without any further ado, let's jump in and get going. The first thing that I want to show you guys is to fix that bug. I want you to check one place here. Go to index.php and make sure here in this section of code where we're checking if there's a cookie and login. This is like an auto login thing. Just make sure that this cookie here is cased properly. So the first letter will be capital and the rest of these will be lowercase, just like I have it. But my bug is, because I've seen some code where it's messed up there, but my bug is coming from, if you go to core, and you go to, oh, I'm sorry, not core. If you go to models and go to user sessions, I have all caps on the cookie here and here when I call that. On the Mac, it just worked, but I'm using Linux now, and I assume maybe even on Windows it does not work. So let's fix that. So cookie exists, and where we call cookie get. There we go. So that should fix that bug. So let's go ahead now and let me just try to log out here and see if that works. And it appears that it has. Okay, so that is that bug fix. So if you've encountered that, that is the fix for it. And let's just keep moving right along. It's going to be a little hard to explain everything up front, what we're going to be doing. I'll try to take a lot of breaks and things like that to kind of stop and explain what I'm doing. But we're going to need a couple things open here to make this work. The first thing that we want open is the index.php file. We're going to have to add some stuff to this auto load. I may even refactor the way we do auto loading and loading in general in future videos, but for now we're going to add to this. And then the other thing that we're going to need open is, if you go to core, go ahead and open up model.php. We're going to do a lot of stuff there. Currently, if you look inside of validate, you can see how validation is currently done. All of the different validations are done inside of this check function, and then there's a big switch statement that goes through each thing. In order for it to work right, you have to completely pass an array that's formatted just right for this to work, and I just don't like it. I used to do things this way, and I should have before we created the this framework, I should have rewrote it, but I just kind of used some old code that I have, and now it's the time that we rewrite it. So I'm just going to close that. We're probably going to delete that at some point. We'll leave it in for now, just in case you have code using it. The first thing that we want to do also is go to controllers and open up register controller, because we're going to be testing this inside of the register form. And then go to views and open register and then register.php. Okay, so we're going to start off by working with these files. But first, I want to give you guys a place to add your custom validators in the future. So we're not going to do anything with it now, but let's go ahead and create a directory here. So inside of app, we're going to create a directory called custom validators. All right, and that's all we need to do there. And then inside of core, create a new folder and call it validators. And so then what we need to do is make sure auto loading will work for this. What we're going to do is in this auto load function, we're going to add a new else if, and we're going to say if file exists, and we'll say root ds, and the first thing we're going to look in is app, because we want to load your custom validators first. So we'll do app and then ds, and then we will look inside of custom validators, and then we will concatenate ds, and then let's do class name .php. So if that file exists, we want to load it. So then we just say require once, and I'm just going to copy all of this in here. All right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this entire else if here, and I'm going to paste it right below this one. And what we'll do is change app here to core. And then inside of core, we're looking for validators, not custom validators. So we'll change it to the same here, core and validators. All right, let's go ahead and save that. That should be all we need to do with our auto load function to make these validators load once we add them in here. So I'm going to go ahead and close the index.php file for now. The next thing that I want to do is go ahead and explain something. What I want to do is create inside this validators, we're going to create an abstract class. And this abstract class is going to allow us to extend it with child classes, which will be our individual validators. If you don't understand what an abstract class is, I'll explain it as we go and kind of show you what it does. But it basically, what we're using it for is it's going to be a parent class. We're never going to call it outright, but we're going to extend it with child classes. And then we're making it abstract because we're going to have a method that is required inside of our child classes that it gets extended. And so the abstract class will force us to do that. Okay, excuse me. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and let's, inside this validators, inside of core validators here, let's add a new file. And we're going to call this file custom validator.php. All right. Once you have that, it's so hard to know what to do here because there's actually a lot to do before this will run. So let's go ahead and take care of some of the other stuff first. Let's just leave this custom validator as it is. And let's open up the model.php file. And the first thing that we're going to need to do is add a couple of new protected properties that we're going to use inside of the model here. Because really, the other reason that we're doing this is that in an MVC structure, the model should be responsible for validating data that's going to be placed in the database. So form validation really needs to be happening inside this model. All right, so I'm going to add a new protected method called validates, and I'm going to set that equal to true by default. And we're also going to add another protected property called validation errors, and we're going to set that equal to an empty array. So for now, that's all the new properties that we're going to need. The next thing that we're going to need to do is add basically a few methods that let's see. So we're going to stub this out. So the first thing we'll do is just kind of come down. Let's do this. I guess down here at the bottom is fine. So let me add a public function, and we're going to call this validator. And we're doing this because our child classes, like all of our models, in this case our child classes are going to be models, and in this case it's not going to do anything, but it has to be here because we're going to be calling that here just in case we don't have a validator method inside of our child classes or our models. We want to go ahead and stub it out here. It's not going to really have a body, and it doesn't really need a body. The next thing that we need is we need to go ahead and add the run validation method. So let's do a public function run validation, and this validation is going to take one parameter called validator. That validator is going to actually be the class that we extend from custom validator. That'll get passed into this. Okay, and if you're confused, don't worry about it. We will get to it. So what I want to do is let's just say key is equal to validator field. There's going to be a property on those classes called field, and so I'm going to finish a few of these functions in the model, and then we'll start building that, and some of this will make sense. So then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to say if not validator let's see, if not validator success, then what we want to do something is we want to say, we want to set this, and then that new property we added to this, validates, we want to set that to false. And then we also want to set this validation errors, and then we're going to pass the key. That'll end up being the field. And then we want to go ahead and pass in the validator message. Okay, we're just going to shorten that to MSG. Alright, so once that's done, basically all this is going to do is it's going to take, if this validator is, if it fails, then what it's going to do is set the properties to false, and then put an error inside the validation errors array right here. So this is set to true by default. It will change that to false if validation fails, and it'll add a message here that we can use on the front end to display to the users. Okay, so now that we have those two methods, let's go ahead and write just a few more really simple methods that we're going to need later on, and they're basically going to be getters for our public functions here, or for our protected properties that we added. Excuse me. So what we want to do here is do a public function get error messages, and all we're going to do here is return this it's underscore this validation errors. Okay, so that's just going to return that array. The next thing that we're going to want to do is create one called validation pass in case we want to use that. It's just another getter. So this function, and then we'll say validation passed, and all we're going to do here is return this validates. Okay, let's see. The last thing that I want to do is give us a way to add, without our validator, we want an additional way to add a error to this so that we can do it from other places, and that'll make sense because there is a place we're going to do that. So we're going to put a public function, and this function is going to be called add error message, and it's going to take two parameters. The first one is going to be a field, and the second will be a message. So then all we have to do is we just say this. What we want to do is set this validates to false, because if we're adding an error message, we don't want it to validate. And then we're going to set this validation errors, and then we're going to go ahead and drop in the field here for the key, and we're going to say equal to message. Okay, what that's going to do is this is just a manual way for us to add an error message to the model. Okay. So now that we have those few methods done, and I know you don't understand what they're going to do yet, because we're going to have to write a little bit of code before it starts to come together. So the next thing that we want to do is start writing our custom validator. Okay, and the reason that we're doing all this is, let me go ahead and just show you an example of how we're going to use this. So if I go to, I want to go to in the app, go to models and go to users, and what I want to be able to do is in users here, I want to add a public function validator. Okay, and inside of validator I want to be able to say this run validation, and then I want to pass in the validator there, and the way that's going to work, let me show you that real quick. It's going to look a little confusing, but don't worry about it. For now, we'll get it. So we'll instantiate a new, and in our case, the first one we'll probably work on is min validator. Okay, and that is going to be to pass in the model. It'll be the first object, so we'll pass in this, which will pass the model that we're working on. So in this case, users will get passed right down to the validator. And then what we want to do in the next param is we're going to have an array, and this array is going to take a field. Okay, and the field will be username, and then it's going to take a rule, which will be in our case 6, and then it will take a message if it fails, and that message will be username must be at least 6 characters. Alright, so that's how this thing's going to work, and we want this validator to fire. We want to be able to call it manually, which we can because it's a public method, but what we want to do is anytime we go to save a user, we want this validator to run automatically. So go back to model.php and find the save method right here. For me, it's on line 48. So we're looking for the save method, and inside the save method, we're going to call the validator. Okay, so we'll put this at the very top of the method here. So even above fields, we're going to say just this, and then we're going to run validator. All right, and then what we're going to do is do an if statement, and we're going to say if this validates. So if that's true, then we're going to run all of this stuff. So we'll do our update or our delete only if the validation passes. I'm going to copy all of this, and then I'm going to cut it and paste it right here inside of that if statement. Okay, else what we want to do is we just want to return false on the save method. So if validation passes, and only if validation passes, will it either insert or update the database record. Else it's just going to return false here. Okay, so go ahead and save that. So this save method, now every time we call it in our application, we'll run the validator before it tries to update or insert the record. which I think is a really cool thing to do. It will make things really easy for us in our controller actions, which you'll see our register controller. So if you go there, currently our register action is from line 48 all the way down to line 97. And you're going to see that this is just going to be a few lines of code when we're done with it. So it will really simplify the actions that forms have to use. And it will effectively move our logic for validation to where it belongs, which is the model. Okay, so let's see how long we've been recording here. We're at about 20-minute mark. Let's go ahead and write our custom validator, and then when we come back in the next video, we'll start building out our validators. Okay, so our custom validator, like I said, is going to just go ahead and open up some PHP tags. Don't close them, but this is actually going to be an abstract class, and it's going to be called custom validator. We'll open and close some curly braces, and then here at the top we need to add some public properties. So we're going to do success. We'll set that to true by default, and then we want message, and we're going to set that to an empty string by default, and then we want field, and we want rule, and we'll just leave those null by default. The next thing that we're going to do is add a protected property here, and this protected property is just going to be model. Okay, so we have all of the properties that we need to set up. Next thing that we're going to do is write our construct function, because if you remember inside of our users model, we actually constructed this as this entire thing. This constructed object gets passed in as a parameter into the model's run validation method. So we need to go ahead and run the constructor. So PHP gives us the magic constructor here, the magic method. We'll just call that, it's called construct with 2 underscores, and it's going to take 2 parameters, which will be model, and the second parameter is going to be params. All right, so the first thing that we want to do inside of this constructor is we want to set up the model. So we'll just say this, and then we're setting the protected property model equal to the model that we're passing down. All right, the next thing we want to do is we want to set up the rest of these, but we want to kind of make this thing future-proof so that we don't forget to pass things that it needs down. And in order to do that, we're going to set up a try-catch block, and we're going to actually throw an exception if we're missing things. So the first check that we want to do is we want to check that the field, that there's an element in this params array called field. So let's go ahead and do that. Just add an if statement, and we're going to say if not array key exists. All right, so if not array key exists field, and we're checking inside of params. So if that doesn't exist, then we're going to throw a new exception, and this, we just give it a message that we want to say. So this is going to be mainly for us. We don't ever want our front-end users to see this anyway. This is going to remind us if we try to use a validator without passing in field. So we're just going to say you must add a field to the params array. Okay. Else, if we do that, then we want to set that up. So then all we have to do is say, hey, this field, and field, we're going to find out that field can be an array or field can be a string. So we're going to actually set this up with a ternary operator. So we're going to say if it's an array, so is array this field. Okay. So, well, actually, instead of checking this field because it hasn't been, let's just do params field. So if that's an array, then what we're going to do is set this, we're going to set field equal to params field, and then it's going to be the first element in that array, so 0. The next, if it's not an array and it's a string, then we're just going to set it equal to params field. Okay. So that will set up the property in this custom validator called field. So that's making sure that is there. So let's go ahead now and make sure that the field actually exists inside the model, because we don't want to try to validate on something that doesn't exist. So we're going to say if not property exists, and then we're going to look at the property here is model. Well, that's the class that we're checking, and the property is going to be this field. So if that doesn't exist, if this field doesn't exist inside of the model, then we want to throw a new exception. So we're going to throw new exception, and we'll just say the field must exist in the model. Okay. If that passes, then what we want to do is we want to say, actually, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to do anything if it passes. It'll just already be ready to go. We just want to throw an exception if it doesn't pass. The next thing we want to make sure, and the last one, this is going to be the last little rule here, is we want to make sure that we include the message, because we need something to display back to the user if it fails. So we're going to say if not array key exists, and we're going to look for the message, and we're looking for that in params. So if that doesn't exist, then we're going to throw a new exception, and that one will be must add a message to the params array. Again, that you can put whatever thing you think will help you remind you, but it's just for us as developers to make sure we remember to do that. The next thing that we're going to do is, if that's fine and ready to go, then we're going to say this message is equal to params message. Okay. The last thing that we want to do is we want to check if we supplied a rule, because some of our validators will have rules and some of them won't. So we're not going to make it required, but we are going to say if array key exists rule, if that exists inside params, then what we want to do is say this rule is equal to params rule. All right, so that will set up this will do it for our constructor, but what we want to do is run a try catch block underneath here. So the last thing that we're going to do in our constructor is we're going to do a try catch block. So this will catch any of those exceptions if they exist. And so the way it works is you say catch exception and then E, open and close some curly braces, and now we can echo something to the screen. So what we're going to echo is validation exception on, and then we'll concatenate on get class, which will return the name of the class that it's failing on, and then we'll do a colon and a space, and then we'll concatenate on the actual message, which will be E get message. And all of this throwing in exceptions and getting messages and all that's actually all PHP built-in stuff. So it's not something special I'm doing here, but you may have not have seen it before. And then I'm just going to put a new line on there. The new line probably won't work, so instead I'll just do a break tag. Alright, the next thing that we need to do is fill in the try. So if there's no exceptions, then we want to say this success is equal to this run validation. Now you might be thinking, but we don't have a run validation method, and that's exactly right. We're not going to have a run validation method. Well, we're going to stub it out here in this abstract class, but we're going to actually have the run validation methods exist on our child classes. Okay, so after that, So we're just going to say this success equals this run validation. I'm going to save that. And I think we're done here. The last thing that we need to do is the whole purpose that we set this up as a abstract class is we want to make sure that we have an abstract public function run validation. Okay, and that doesn't get open and closing brackets when you do that. This is just going to make sure this is a parent class. So think of it like this: in a parent class, that's an abstract class. Anytime you generate a child from this, so you extend this with a child class, you're saying, look, if you're going to be my child, you're going to implement this method. So you're basically promising, like, as my child, you're going to have a run validation method inside of you. And this run validation method will always return either true or false, and that's it. So when we get down to this try catch block, it actually runs that run validation method on the child class. And it so think of it this way: when you extend this, it's actually going to be constructing the child class, and the child class must have this run validation. So what we're doing with the abstract class is saying, hey man, you got to have that. And if you forget that, or if you name it something else, what's going to happen is you'll actually get an error on the screen. All right, so I know we didn't actually get to do any validation yet, but we've built our custom validator, and now we're in the next video. What we're going to do is start building our actual validators and seeing how they work. And I think you'll be excited to see this process in action. All right, guys. Well, I hope that helps, and I'll see you in the next video.